Hey everybody, I am Tish Hicks. I am the Master Sensei of the VO Dojo here in Burbank, California. This is our monthly free question and answer webinar called Ask the Sensei. Each month, myself as the Master Sensei and our Techno Sensei, Dan Lenard, who's the home studio master, come together and we invite one of our esteemed favorite colleagues in lots of different aspects of the voiceover business to join us as a guest sensei. Sensei is teacher in the martial arts, right? And answer your questions. So we have a really nice blend of people who it looks like are beginning their journey, are on their way on their journey, and then God knows it never stops. So it looks like we've got a really nice blend of folks here, and a really nice amount of people that are assembling as well. So so that's me. We can talk a little bit, I'll talk about that. There he is. Hey, Dan. So we'll talk, the dojo is here as a resource for you, and we'll talk a little bit about what we do at the end. So I'll introduce Dan, and then we are so excited to have Kal-el Bogdanove here as our guest. He's one of my favorite, not only favorite video game directors to work with, but one of my favorite humans because he's so awesome. So it's an honor to have him here for this quick hour because he's the busiest man in show business. So thank you, Kal-el, for being here. Hi, Dan. You want to introduce yourself, and then we'll introduce Kal-el and
Sure.
And everybody while we're chatting a little bit. Start getting your questions in because I'll always have 100 million questions, but this is all of our time too. So
Right.
Don't be shy, and there's nothing. I guess one criteria that is probably good to maybe lay out just because of the realm that that Kal-el works in, is like pertaining to the voiceover part of video games. I don't know. If we get too fanboy-y, we'll just kind of segue back to to voiceover. But just ask your questions and we'll roll with it.
Yeah.
So hey Dan, good morning. Thank you.
Good morning. Hello everyone. I'm Dan Lenard, the home studio master and the Techno Sensei here at the VO Dojo. And if you have questions on home voiceover studios and you feel like you're totally overwhelmed and intimidated and think that you've got to have guitars hanging on the wall and a big glass window and a couch and all that stuff in your studio, you're talking the wrong thing. But that's what I do, as I teach you how to do it at home.
Excellent. Good. And Kal-el, can you introduce yourself and tell us what you
certainly
do?
Hi, I'm Cal. I am a writer and director. I've done a lot of work in VO. At Disney, I created their entire audio-only program for Amazon, and then outside of Disney, I've directed voiceover and performance capture for quite a few video games, probably most well known for Fallout 4 and Fallout 76, but I've worked on a ton of games. I won't list them all here because we only have an hour. And I'm very happy to be here, and I hope I can answer some questions in a way that is useful to one and all.
Excellent. All right. Well, we've got a couple of questions coming in. We'll kind of mix them up and combine them. Okay. So Cole's first question is, how long is the most effective audition? In other words, when they give you a sample script, for the audition, how long should the audition be? 30 seconds, 60 seconds? And I'll just chime in here with a little mindset shift from the very top. There is no they, there's only we. So when you go like, they give you a sample, suddenly you're not part of the team yet. But if you go like, when we get a video, when we get a thing to work on, how much do we want, right? So it's just a little mindset shift. But let's roll with that, and I'll get some of the questions into the question and answer. Guys, and just logistically, if you can put your questions in the question and answer rather than the chat, then we'll have them all.
I'm looking at the chat, I think. Where's the question?
Okay.
Oh, there it is. Q&A.
Yeah.
Q&A.
Yeah,
because there's a couple in the there's a couple.
Yeah, we'll take them from the chat and just moving forward. Yeah, there we go. Excellent. Thanks, Becky.
So for my part, I will say the length of the audition is dictated by the content of the breakdown. You know, they're gonna, I mean, when you receive an audition for something, typically there's gonna be, you know, a breakdown on top that describes the character or the setting a little bit, and then there's gonna be some copy, and the length of the copy will define the length of the audition. I'm a big fan of sending 2 takes that are very different from each other to demonstrate range. I will also say that if you get one of those, there's a lot of video game auditions that are, they're not like a monologue or anything. They're like a list of sort of one-line pieces of copy. And if you get those, I highly recommend doing 2 back-to-back on each line. So rather than going one all the way through and then another all the way through, do like you're going to do in the booth and give me an A and a B and make them real different from each other. You know? Like the only time I have ever turned off or thrown out an audition is if I get 2 of anything that are the same. That's wasting my time, and I will absolutely chuck that. But if you just give me 2, it doesn't matter. There's no right way on a piece of copy, right? There's just a bunch of different good ways to do it. So if you give me 2 that are real different, that will stand you in good stead. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah. Now, do you think that's your preference, Cal, or do you think that any video game director would like that? Like that?
You mean to hear 2 back to back? I think anyone would.
Okay, great. That's huge.
Because I mean, look, there's a lot of people working in this business. I can't speak for everybody, but
right.
What we're trying to do with any audition for a game or for a cartoon or for a commercial copy, really anything, right, is demonstrate your ability as much as is possible in the boundaries of that copy. So there is no nailing the breakdown. You should give up on that immediately. That's like trying to shoot an arrow down a hallway and around a corner and hit a bullseye. It's impossible. What you can do is look at the breakdown. The breakdown will either be great or it'll be crappy. It kind of doesn't matter. What you're going to want to do is find something in the breakdown that sparks the imagination. Paint a very specific scene for yourself, right? And act it so that we can hear the scene too. And basically you're trying to use the copy to demonstrate your ability to make interesting choices and commit fully to the theater of the mind, which is just acting is acting, right? It's the same on stage, it's the same on set, et cetera, et cetera. It just, when it's VO, all we have is your voice. So you just really got to paint the picture for us.
Yeah.
Which means that even if it's a shitty little one-liner like, you're out of line, man, or something like that, you have to know exactly on every performance who you're talking to and why you're saying what you're saying and how you feel about the person that you're looking at. So, and that would go for anyone listening to any auditions. They just want to hear you act, right? They want to more than that, they want to be drawn into the theater of the mind. So you got to make sure your theater of the mind is very well detailed.
Wow, that's fantastic. Great. Excellent. And let's see, Becky has a great question that Dan, this can be for you too. But this is really important. When recording a screamtastic voiceover audition from home, what is the best way to keep it from going into the red? I find that it's been keeping me from going all out in audition. That's a really interesting question.
Yeah, well, that's like basic tech that most people don't seem to get. And there's this meter on there called a VU meter. And if you go into the red, which she clearly is, then you need to make an adjustment so you don't. And there's two ways you can do that. You can either turn down your gain and yell into the microphone with the gain turned down, which is so incredibly unnatural because we don't yell in people's ears. This guy here is an ear. It's a very good ear, as a matter of fact. And if we yell into it, we create this unnatural sound that is going to drive Kal just absolutely bonkers. So my philosophy is, as always, the acoustics of the room is important. Setting proper levels is important. And also extremely important is your microphone technique. When you yell, especially if you're carrying a large scimitar or something like that and you're about to chop somebody's head off, you're not like, I'm going to chop you. You don't do that. It doesn't sound right. So you back off the microphone. I will chop your head off. And that's how you do that. And you practice and you watch the meter and, and understand that the proximity to the microphone will also determine what output you're putting into your file. So use your microphone wisely. Just remember that we don't talk an inch from somebody's eardrum. We certainly don't scream an inch from somebody's eardrum unless you're like a really abusive person, which I guess some game characters might actually be. But it's important to realize that you've got to turn away from the mic. If you yell very loud, it's going to hear you, and it's going to hear you clearly from what you're saying. I mean, you can back way, way off, and you're right in line with the microphone. And so that's how you do that. If you know you're going to do a lot of shouting for like all of different auditions within there, turn your gain way down about half, and then try that. But play around with it. It's your input gain that's causing that, nothing else.
Mm-hmm. And then finding that balance of being off mic enough to not blast it, but on mic enough to not sound like you're in another room.
Right. Yeah. If I may chime in, I would say rather than, I think that what Dan is saying in terms of like figuring out your mic placement dynamically throughout a performance is way better than riding the gain, generally speaking, because you're almost never, unless we're doing like a list of battle barks, you're almost never in the studio going to have a line that is almost never gonna have a script that is all shouting, right? You're gonna, and very rarely do you even have a line that's all shouted, right? The emotional modulation occurs in the middle of sentences all the time. So knowing that the microphone is an ear and like very fully picturing your distance to the actual target of your speech in pretend land is just generally better. It's easier to commit to an imaginary scenario if you're riding your volume control by moving your body the way you would in actual space than it is if you're going like, is this knob right, while you're trying to act.
Totally.
Right. Yeah, two separate functions, right? Engineer hat, performer hat. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not really engineering. As a performer, this is part of your paintbrush, and you've got to learn how to use it properly. So.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, but these are really good questions, guys. So, I wanted to note that Katie. Hi, Katie. Katie noted that she knows a director who insists on reading all the way through. So read the directions thoroughly through all when you're auditioning. kind of feel that out. I guess that's true of everything. So
Yeah,
thank
I
you.
mean, you want to use you want to use the breakdown to glean as much information as you can about what it is you're auditioning for.
Yeah.
And again, some breakdowns are crummy and some are great. But even a crummy one provides opportunities for you to make cool choices, right? I mean, look, you don't want to make choices that are completely different from the breakdown and send that as your only take. But you might want to make some choices that are really weird for your take too. When we are casting, we listen to literally thousands of performances on the same piece of copy. And a great many of them are good, right? There's a lot of very talented actors out there. And so when it comes down to actually casting somebody, almost always we're looking for the person it will almost always end up going to the person who's made a really interesting choice that isn't immediately obvious in the breakdown. Because we'll hear a zillion that are all pretty good. They're all kind of guys with good sound and deep voices, and they're all competently acted, and they're all more or less exactly the specs. And you go, well, okay, great. How in this case do I, choose between DC Douglas and Roger Craig Smith? Well, if the day, right?
Embarrassment of riches.
One of them has happened to be like, you know what? I picture this guy chopping wood, right? And he just does the copy like he's, particularly on a take two, right? He doesn't say anything about that in the breakdown. But on a take two, he does it like he's chopping wood. And I see that in the instant I hear it in my mind's eye, that guy's getting the part.
That's
every
cool.
time, right? Because again, your responsibility as an actor in VO is to paint the scene as thoroughly as possible. So why not do a take two where you're being pursued by hungry wolves, or where you're eating a sticky fluffernutter sandwich or something? It doesn't have to be in the breakdown. Most breakdowns are shitty. Mostly terrible. So just make good choices that work for you and show off interesting stuff you can do. Don't distract from the copy, but feel free to embellish it, particularly on a take.
That's huge. That's huge. Cool. Well, and I think this might be a good segue to Mary Claire's question in the chat. How long do you typically English good? How long do you typically listen to a VO audition and or reel?
If I wrote the breakdown, I listen to the whole thing. Because if I wrote the breakdown, I know that I set it up to be not too long because because I deliberately put in a lot of opportunities to make emotional adjustments. So I want to hear people tackle all of those, right? Because sometimes people take a minute to warm up in an audition. I've heard a few, if like the first line, I'm like, this isn't going to be good. You never know. Sometimes somebody makes some kind of really interesting choice by the end.
That's super cool.
So if I know that they're not all 10 minutes long because I defined the copy, I listen to them all the way through, as painful as that may be. If somebody else wrote the copy and built the breakdown and they're all enormously long, then I will try to listen to at least 30 seconds of each one. I try to listen all the way through to everything, even if they're super long. But that depends on volume and timeline, right? If I got 2 weeks to cast, great. But if it's like, here they are, it's Friday night, we need a decision Monday, and there's 5,000 auditions and they're all 5 minutes long, that's math, friend.
Right.
I still gotta like cook dinner and go to the gym and mow my lawn and stuff. So there's only so much you can do. But you do want to put your best foot forward always, because there are people less generous than I who just go like, next,
Yeah.
next,
Yeah.
next. So put the best thing first. If you listen back to the audition you just laid down and you're like, I think my take 3 is actually stronger, recut it and put it first, because you don't know when someone's going to move along. But I personally listen to all of it if I can.
Fantastic. Good to know. Good to know. James asks, is it vital to have an agent for video games? Does one need a professional reel specifically for video games to get an agent?
The answer to this used to be absolutely yes. In the age of the internet, there is a certain amount of sort of overseas non-union video game work that is just getting posted on breakdown services. So you can actually kind of get a start before you even have an agent. But if you want to make any kind of sizable dent in the business, yeah, absolutely, you're going to need one. And that's not because an agent has any kind of like magic advice necessarily. It's because they get sent the breakdowns.
The big opportunity.
Right? The one thing I would like to seize on in this question and say is, I don't think it's particularly good for you to make a distinction between doing such and such for video games versus other acting. What I'm saying is, acting is acting is acting is acting. Acting for VO and the screen and the stage have more in common than they have different. Acting for different kinds of VO, from an industrial right up to a cinematic for a video game, has more in common than it has different. So when I encounter someone who's like, I just want to get into do funny voices for cartoons, or I just want to get into I just want to work in video games, I'm like, awesome. It's good to be passionate about a particular part of the field, but you're limiting yourself and you're not going to get cast. Because you cannot study being a video game voice actor or being an animation voice actor. It's not a different profession from being an actor. It would be better for you to have great improv chops and take movement classes, right? And you're like, movement, but in VO, I am in a booth and you never see my body. Well, yeah, but the body holds memory, right? And physicality, and being able to paint physicality is extra important when we can't actually see you, right? So don't study being a video game voiceover artist. There's no such thing. Study being an actor. Think about being an actor. If you want to be an actor who works in VO a lot, don't just limit yourself to video games. No matter what, if you say a line on mic, you are playing a role. Even if what you're doing is doing voiceover for a TLC show, you are still playing a role whether you mean to or not. The only thing is, if you don't make conscious choices about the role that you are playing, then you will always be playing actor who doesn't know what they're doing by default.
Tonight I'll be playing. That's brilliant.
So I know that's a bit of a digression away from that question. The answer is yes, it's good to have an agent. The answer is yes, having a good reel helps you get an agent, but don't waste money making a reel until your chops are really solid. It will be a waste of time and money. Easily 50% of people who work in this field have some kind of garbage reel they did their first year out when they're like, I got to get an agent. I got bills to pay, man. I got to buy diapers, right? And they're like, I got to rush to make a reel. And inevitably, in 2 or 3 years, when they've built up some real chops, they listen back and they go, yikes, this was really shooting me in the foot, right? I got to do this again, and I lost all that money. So it's more important to do the 5,000 hours to mastery, like the Beatles or all that stuff. Better to take classes and work on your own and work on your mic technique, like Dan was just talking about, and really, really hone the edge on your blade, before you dump all that money into making a reel. Because honestly, you may ultimately build up enough work doing those little, breakdown service jobs, the little non-union stuff from overseas, etc. You may start making real money doing that, and you may just be able to query an agent and say like, hey, I did this, this, and this.
Mm-hmm.
And then the agent will be like, you're awesome. Let's make you a reel in-house, right?
Right. Yeah.
So it's not the rush to get a reel. It's important to have a good, strong reel. One for animation and one for games is typically a pretty good separation, and a third for commercial work. You might ultimately kind of need 3, but be really ruthless in your evaluation of where you're at before you do it, because otherwise you'll just be kind of throwing money down the garbage disposal.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Really good. Let me just get back to scrolling up on the questions here. This is a really cool question from Alice. Is there a difference when doing voiceover work for a VO job versus mocap versus virtual reality? And this is an interesting discussion because, as you said, it's all the same, and I would say one of the first obvious distinctions is when you're doing a VO job, the words are in front of you, and when you're on a mocap set or VR set, it's more like you're on a film set, that you have to have your words in you, right? You have to memorize.
There are technical differences that are huge. The biggest of which is exactly that. There's when you're in the booth, there's a script sitting on a stand or on a monitor in front of you, and doing PCAP. And highly recommend that you learn to say performance capture or PCAP rather than motion capture or mocap.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Actors get really pissed off when you're just like, you're just motion, man. Like, screw you, I do more stuff than you guys do. Sorry. Anyway, that's a digression. Yes, the difference between a VO for a console game and VO for a virtual reality experience is negligible. It's all the same theater of the mind stuff, right? The difference with PCAP is when you're doing PCAP, it's a lot more like doing black box theater, in that you are learning blocking and you're doing scene work. And unless you're doing a multi-mic record, you're very rarely getting to do much scene work in the booth. You're mostly building the scenes in your mind rather than reacting to stuff from the director, ideally, rather than reacting to other actors who are actually physically there. That makes PCAP in some ways kind of easier, right? Because you don't have to imagine the eye line of your cohort. It's just there for you, like it would be on stage or on set.
Unless you're talking to someone who's supposed to be a 10-foot tall monster, in which case.
Yeah, that's right. Sometimes they'll be like, he's not. Yes, exactly. Sometimes they'll be like, he's 15 feet tall. His eye line is this tennis ball. But that's the same as being like, you're looking right at him, but actually your mark is the lamp.
Right.
Give your dramatic monologue to the lamp the way you would on set sometimes. So it's different technically, but it is not different. Again, I know I'm sort of a broken record. Acting is acting is acting is acting. Right? Jack Nicholson calls acting pretending fearlessly. Right? And that's the skill, and it's going to be useful to you in all of those contexts. And I'll tell you what, sometimes people have been doing a lot of VO, getting the volume, which is the space that they do PCAP in, and they are like asleep below the neck a little bit, but that's a problem for your VO work more than it's a problem for your PCAP work, right? You can't let the body be asleep because emotions happen in the nervous system of the body.
Ooh, yes. And that's a little segue to your VO Nidra work that you do.
Yes, indeed, that it is.
Do you want to take a couple of minutes and talk about that work that you do with Mia? Because it's
if I get a chance to promote my class in your class, I don't see why.
It's not just your class. It's your take on this is absolutely profound. So it's
so from just a just from a theory perspective, when I'm giving direction, I can faff about saying like, warm it up, or I can say, put your hand on his shoulder, right? And even just going like in the booth creates a way into that emotion. It's not the entirety of the performance, but it is a doorway into the performance. And that's something that I learned on the hoof doing this work before I ever really studied why that was the case. But in recent years, I have partnered with a friend of mine who is a yogi and like a body worker, who does this thing called yoga nidra, which is, it sounds like it's posing and stuff, but it's not. It's actually like a deep meditation technique. And basically the theory of yoga nidra and this kind of body work that my friend Maya does is that the mind and the body are in constant dialogue through your nervous system, right? So like, and they affect each other, and you can treat the one by treating the other. So like, if you're depressed, you may find that you walk around with sort of rounded shoulders a lot, and you might have back pain and neck pain. And so you can treat your neck pain and back pain by treating your depression, right? That makes you tend to sort of straighten up and be posturally healthy. But it works the other way too, right? Sometimes treating your neck and back pain, where the sympathetic nervous system is all clenched up, and alleviating those symptoms alleviates depression. There's all kinds of ways in which our emotional state and our physical state are tied together. And that's because in life, when we're not acting, when we're just reacting, we never really experience one without a change in the other. So knowing what's going on with the physicality of your character, even though you are just a disembodied voice, is super duper important, because the physicality of our bodies holds emotional memory. And if you don't believe me, try this exercise. Take a line that's very neutral, like, what do you mean? Or, I don't know about that. And try saying it with your chest all concave and your shoulders hunched and your back in a hang-dog mode. And then say it again, just having done this and puffing your chest out of that hang-dog attitude. You will be shocked at how different the reads are just by adjusting that.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah. And so yes, physicality is super duper important. And if you have it alive and you are in touch with the physicality of your character in the booth, then you will have no trouble making the jump to performance capture, because it's just acting. Acting is acting.
Yeah, that's, wow. It's so good. And that's why I love working with Kal-el, because that's also like this holistic approach that voiceover is, yes, a business, it's an art form that serves commerce, etc., but it's also about integrating your mind and your body and your spirit, this very holistic approach to this thing that just seems like saying words. It all ties together. It's very, very much in line with everything that we're doing here. It's great. Dan, I think there was a tech question that I wanted to skip down to from Tim. Let me just find it here.
About room noise.
Yeah.
Yeah. It says, is there a level of room noise that is acceptable, or should I strive for a dead room every single time? I sometimes use my software to reduce ambient sound for complete silence between waveforms. It depends on who you are and where you live and how loud your background noise is. Again, the rules with the home studio are do every single possible thing you can to physically eliminate exterior noise. And that means either heavy walls or a closet or a quiet room, moving to Utah, one of those things. You really have to have a quiet background. Using software. All these guys who you see on Facebook and LinkedIn and all these forums talking about, oh, I've got this great software that'll do this, are recording engineers or geeks. Geeks don't hire voice talent. You want to have the cleanest possible file you can. And that means don't use some of the software, especially if you don't know how to use it, because it will disrupt your file and make it sound like you don't know what you're doing, even if you give a great performance. And so make sure you learn the physical environment in which you're recording and do everything you possibly can to not use any filters. It's just something that is overwhelmingly done with a lot of people because they can. It doesn't mean they should.
And I also love, Dan, the way that you approach this is what we're trying to capture is the experience of me talking to you in a room.
Right.
So if that, it's not like everything goes to a vacuum in between our sentences.
Right.
So there is that experience that we also want to capture. If there's a buzzsaw or a leaf blower, we don't want to capture that. But
right.
But just that feeling of, are we in, and then I think that goes to what you're saying, Cal, too, of we want to be in the space having the experience with you.
Yeah, I want to make sure that I'm having the experience you as an actor intend for me to have, right?
Ooh.
So if you're trying to paint a scene of a leafy forest floor and a couple of elves talking, I really don't want to hear a motorcycle. If I can help it, right? Because it'll take me out of it.
But if you're doing a scene from GTA 6, that's okay.
My brain will just filter that stuff out.
Toilet flushing aren't a good one either.
I just want to reinforce what Dan is saying, which is to say that I am not an engineer. I don't give a shit about the audio quality, except if it's distracting.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear as nearly as possible a recreation of what your voice sounds like in person. So don't boost the bass or any of that crap, because then you'll get into the booth and I'll be like, what's this? Right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear what you're actually going to sound like on the day. And I don't want to be distracted by other noise. So keeping the noise floor low is great in the sense of it won't pop up and like make me go, what's that? Oh, God. Or like, oh God, this recording's so hard to listen to, right? Like that would be bad. Beyond that, that's never, you're like your home mic. The difference between one that's pretty good and the best you can get from an audition perspective is none. Right? Now, look, if you're recording files that are deliverable from your home, because there are plenty of people who do that, right? There are people who they're like, I'm the voice of NBC, the Peacock, and they send me a million little promos over the course of a week, and they need them right away, and I just go in my home booth and I zip them out and I send them back, right? If you're doing that, then it's like having a recording studio in your house. That's a different story.
Yeah.
But if you're just auditioning, you just don't want it to be distracting.
Right.
You don't want to you want to put as few barriers as possible between me and whatever the dramatic scenario you're painting is.
Yeah. In other words, it's not a matter of sounding great, it's a matter of not sounding bad.
Right. Ooh, that's a really good distinction.
And I want to again sort of echo that thing about filters and that kind of thing. Don't goose your voice, and don't do it don't do like in a world up at this real close to the mic, because it makes people lazy, particularly men. Men with big deep voices.
We're lazy. What can we say?
Rarely do I hear this with I should say with people who have a feminine vocal range. Mm-hmm. But a lot of guys who get in, or people with a more masculine vocal range, a deeper vocal range, who get into VO, someone has told them like, hey man, you got a great voice, and they're all basically like, wow, I guess I really do have a great voice, I should get into voiceover. And then they just rest on that, and they don't learn how to act. They just growl. And I delight in throwing those away. when I get them, because you and it I can tell when someone is really leaning on that without building the rest of their toolkit, because they mic themselves at like a centimeter. Right, and I get this big deep animal sounding voice, and that's cool, but it's one trick.
And you don't care, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
there's a zillion dudes who
sound
sound
of,
like that. I can hire Fred Tatasciore, who sounds like that and can act the wings off a fly, at 1,000 paces, right?
Right.
So I'm not gonna hire you if you just sound like that but haven't built your skills.
Yeah, cool. Let's see. I think Stacy's question we've kind of been answering as we go along. What are some common mistakes that people make? I think this just relying on the sound of your voice. I think we've kind of been answering that along. Anything other specific?
This is just a reiteration, but the number one mistake you make in any kind of performance, but is particularly vulnerable in auditions, is you don't do the groundwork for good scene work, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like people love to act and they want to get into acting because they love to act, and then they forget to do it at the last minute because they're so freaked out about whether the gain is set right or whatever, and that's irrelevant. Right? It's only relevant if it interferes in my ability to actually hear you. What's relevant is for you to know exactly what you're looking at.
Yeah.
So that I will know exactly what you're looking at. 3 questions you should answer in any performance, particularly in auditions. If you answer these 3 questions, you'll be 85% of the way there. What am I looking at? How do I feel about it? And how does it feel back about me? Because the modulation in those 3 things over the course of a piece of copy is performance, right? The humor is a lie detector. And that's why anyone can tell bad acting. We've all evolved to hear deception, because in the wild, the sound of deception is the sound of danger. Right? So that's why even a child in Poughkeepsie can hear bad acting. They don't know why it's bad, but they know it's not right.
And it can be
and what they're hearing is the absence of hesitation, cogitation, the dirty junk of human speech. Our actual speech is full of holes. Even when we're being very urgent, we need moments to react to what's happening, right? There's all this kind of gunk in there. And if you strip that stuff out, which is what happens when you're reading something rather than seeing it, we all know it's bad acting. We can just hear it, whether we're trained or not. And the way you solve that is by letting your performance evolve as a reaction to what is happening in the theater of the mind, rather than as something that's driven by words on a page. I don't really care if you nail the words. I don't really care about that. I care that you take me somewhere. So the gist is fine, right? There are a few casting directors for whom that is not the case. There's one in particular in animation who really likes the first take to be exactly the words on the page. But for me, and certainly on your take 2 for anyone, it's more important that you really commit to the scene, right? For instance, how I say something in life will change enormously based on what I am getting back from the person I'm talking to. If I'm getting resistance, I will persuade, right? So if I'm like, that guy's such a dick, he really is, right? That's because in the middle there, the person I was talking to was like,
are you sure
is he? I thought he was a nice guy. Versus if I'm like, that guy's such a dick, he really is, right? Then I'm getting, they're reinforcing my feeling, right? They're going, yeah, that guy's a real dick. And neither of those is right. There is no right, but they both put another person in the scene with me. And that's the thing that you need to do. What am I looking at? How do I feel about it? And then crucially, how does it feel back about me? Because that'll completely reshape your performance.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And rather than going like, I'm going to mark every space of what happens, just see the person, right? Just play pretend in your mind's eye, see them and see how they feel back.
Right.
It'll change your performance. And it'll shut up actor brain, who's going, am I doing this right? Actor brain is always going, am I doing this right? And you have to go, here, actor brain, do this instead.
Right. Or what else can I make happen?
Right.
Make happen. Oh, then he does this and then he does that. And like,
yeah.
Yeah, good.
I'd actually like to ask a question of Kal, if I could, because it comes down to the concept of self-direction, which, as far as I'm concerned, is literally impossible for the majority of people. You really do need an extra ear listening to you when you do an audition, because you're basically guessing when you're throwing it out there as an audition. Like, is this what they want? As opposed to someone saying the things that you're saying, like use physicality, try, do it with a Russian accent, something like that. Just that's going to mix it up or something. And that I think the skill of self-direction is possibly, with home studios today, is probably the hardest skill there is to learn, and you ain't gonna learn it overnight.
Yeah. But I do think that it is possible to self-direct, because if you're asking yourself the right questions and you create the framework, if you create a big enough framework, like how the goal is, am I doing something so that you experience this experience? Then what are the tools and how do you build that for yourself? And then when you get to work with somebody else, then you can both be playing at it. So, I do agree with you, Dan, that it is the essence of everything that we need to do.
It's very difficult. You're absolutely right. When you start, there's a million ways to get it right. There's a million different little techniques. Some of them work for some people and not for others. It all really comes down to fearlessly committing to Imagination Land. But there's a lot of different ways to help yourself do that. One of them that I really like is draw the space ahead of time. Not when, it's because like sometimes I think the problem that Dan was describing happens when you're trying to direct and act at the same time.
Ooh, that's an interesting.
It's really hard to do. But what you can do is give yourself a note ahead of time and then react to that note the way you would if another person was giving it to you as the director.
That's right? A cool way to think about it.
So there's a lot of different ways to do that. But one of them that I really, really like is when you're looking at the script, you're looking at the copy, you're looking at the breakdown, take a pencil and draw a little top-down diagram of the space in the margin. You ever look at one of those real estate plots, like when you're looking at an apartment or a house or something, and it's like, this little box is a toilet, and this little pie wedge is where the door is, and like that. That doesn't have to be detailed, doesn't have to be pretty, but figure out where stuff is in the room, how far away you are from who you're talking to, where you're going, and what you're doing. And get that stuff all figured out, like blocking, before you even tackle the words, so that you can just act that in your mind's eye. Here's where the window is. So I know at this point I can walk over to the window pane and look at the drops pattering on the glass, right? You'll see in video games all these auditions, all the time, these sort of big, chewy, sort of Shakespearean, at last I have him where I want him kind of lines, right? And people see that and they're like, okay, this is like Skeletor. He's like, but how much more interesting is it if that happens? You're told that by your underling, and instead of just chewing the scenery, you get up and you walk over and you pour yourself a scotch, and just looking at your reflection in the glass of the scotch, you say it at about 3 inches, right? That one is the out of the way one that will book, maybe, right? But you can't make those discoveries if you don't know that there's a banquet table over here on the side with a decanter and some scotch in it. Right. Yeah. So like you just figuring out physical relationships the way that you would on stage or on set can really help a lot of people. really it's a great first step to
Yeah.
directing yourself.
Sometimes at the dojo, I talk about like when you get a piece of copy, what is the playground that you create? Like here's the boundaries of the playground and what's in your playground, and that's a really, really specific, like creating the scene that you can play in. That's brilliant. Excellent. We're getting down to the wire time wise. So let's see. There's a couple quick technical questions. Dan, do you want to take the file thing? The file question. Sorry, the file question. Speaking of specificity, where is it? Stephen's question, what's the best way to deliver files? That's the question.
Oh yeah. Well, that's, I think that's a question of not really understanding that the internet is the internet is the internet. And it's like, what's the best way to deliver FiOS, cable modem, or the best way to deliver it is by email. If it's on your phone and you're connected to the internet, if you're sending an MP3, you're sending an MP3 over the internet. There is no difference between any of these. It has no difference with the speed in which you're doing this, because you're not doing it live. You're recording it, you're editing it, you're mixing it down to to an MP3 format, which is a small file, which you can attach to an email, and it doesn't matter whether it's FiOS or a cable modem or AT&T. Well, if it's AT&T, it's not going anywhere. Right. But other than that, it's it's a matter of, if you're connected to the internet, you're connected to the internet, and even a 128 kbps modem, it's still going to get there eventually.
Yeah, that's different if you're if you're like doing source connect in order to like record to a studio remotely. That's different. That's a professional application, and most often you'll be going into a studio wherever you are to do that. It would be pretty rare for you to need something like that in the home. Beyond that, no, I just care that the file gets there. Right.
Yeah. Good.
Audio is relatively data cheap, right? Video files are huge. Audio is, by comparison, pretty compact.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. A couple of questions about working in major markets versus other places. I know you touched on it in terms of the international aspect of finding games. So there's two questions. Yeah, I mean, it's basically what's working remotely, East Coast, West Coast talent, that might fit into there, and working remotely, even if you're in the same town, right, Dave G? That's a real, like, I may as well be coming from Poughkeepsie if I'm coming from, Marina Del Rey to someplace.
Poughkeepsie's a wonderful little town.
No, but it's far. It's far from here.
I use it because it just sounds like the antithesis of the entertainment industry.
It's just up the road from
I hear Poughkeepsie and it's all like, yeah, that town is like all diners and egg sandwiches. It's like not, like they're working on high steel there and saying, yeah, see, I don't know. Poughkeepsie. Anyway, it depends what kind of career you want to have. It is absolutely possible to have a flourishing career that will buy you a house in a remote housing market, not living in LA, right? So if you live, in Waldwick, New Jersey, or Poughkeepsie, or something like this, and you absolutely can have a career, but you should understand that a great deal of what you will be doing there is like local commercials. Come on down to Ed's Furniture. We've got the best furniture. Ed's. It's gonna be stuff like that, or even like local Egg McMuffin stuff for Burger King, that kind of thing, right?
And how about for the video game industry specifically?
It is possible to work in this industry in a minor way remotely. Mm-hmm. But if you are serious about being an actor in major markets, you need to live in a major market. You specifically need to live in Los Angeles. I really think living in New York is a waste of your time. It's a great town if you are if you want to act on stage. It's the best town if you want to act on stage. But it's useless for video games, and I think sort of increasingly for film and television, unfortunately. Now, you can move back there when you're like a rich, famous person, right? You can be bi-coastal, and you can also have like a house in, you know, I don't know, the south of France or whatever. That's fine. Money solves all those problems. But when you're starting out, once you've kind of built your chops somewhere where it doesn't cost an arm and a leg to live, you really ought to come somewhere near Los Angeles, because there's opportunities here that you'll miss out on if you're not available. I know a guy who's real good actor, has been nibbling away at video games, and has been commuting back and forth from Florida. You know, he's like got a lot of work in local market stuff in Florida. He doesn't want to let go, but like he's really ready to be booking big time stuff out here. And he's lost out a couple of gigs just because they couldn't wait for him to fly in.
That's just real. That's real. And good. That's a really honest, fantastic answer.
But again, if you're just like, I just want to use my instrument and earn a living and, you know, put my kids through school and stuff, you can do that in a local market. Just know that you're probably not going to be working on Fallout from Poughkeepsie.
Right.
Which is a lovely town. I'm not really.
we love Poughkeepsie.
Sylvia New Paltz is right there. It's one of the best acting schools in the country.
Yeah, you know, look, you'll have great opportunities in places like that. You'll be able to do regional theater. You'll be able to do local commercials. You can make a bundle doing that stuff, but but you're not going to have access to the core of the entertainment industry, which is in Los Angeles. It just is.
Yeah,
and Bollywood, right? You can also do it in India, but those are your two choices. You live here, or you live in Delhi. Those are your choices.
Yeah. Excellent. Let's see. Technically, we should wrap up and say what we're doing. But there's one more question.
I don't mind gracing you guys a couple.
Yeah.
We can just rapid fire some of these questions.
Well, I think the big question that I think is most interesting is where do you forecast the video game industry headed in the next couple of years? That's a really interesting thing that you have I think you have a unique insight on. And maybe it's not as mystical as.
It's pretty straightforward. It's growing.
Yeah,
it's growing. More people play games than at any other point in history. So there's more and more jobs in games every year. More and more work. It's a extremely lucrative industry. A major market video game like a Call of Duty or something like that will make billions of dollars in a couple of weekends.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good place to be. Games also offer more opportunities for small choice cinematic acting than most cartoons do. So I find that to be a real good, interesting. I love cartoons, but they're fun and they're acting, but they're slapstick typically, and so I like working in games as well because we get to do really little intimate scene work type stuff.
Yeah.
So what I will say is we're entering a place where games become a sustained update model rather than a discrete release.
Ooh,
that's really good for actors, right? So Fallout 76 as opposed to Fallout 4, right? Fallout 4, we did all the VO over a course of 3 or so years, and we released the game, and then we did a couple of DLC, and we released the DLC, and that was it. But Fallout 76, I'll be working on and off probably for the next 10 years. Right?
Wow.
World of Warcraft. It's continuously updated with new content.
That's cool.
So getting into a game like that has, that has a sustainment model is cool. It can be. I mean, it's not as lucrative as television, but it can stand you instead for a while. Those are the really things I think are changing.
That's cool.
Everybody keeps saying like, "Oh, VR is going to change everything," but I don't know if that's the case. I'll believe that when I see a model for VR that a group can do in the home.
Interesting.
They haven't cracked yet.
Yeah, interesting, cool. Well, this is great. So yeah, I think we should, let's see if we can pop through these.
Let me just roll through a few. Yes,
Yeah.
I have been an actor, but not in a very long time. I did a ton of theater when I was a kid. I started when I was around 8. I was in a production of Oliver, and then I did a lot of stuff on stage between then and when I graduated high school. I did a lot of musicals. I was the music man in that. I did a bunch of Shakespeare. Shakespeare's great for video game technique. Founded a theater company, et cetera, et cetera. When I got to college, I started focusing on film and television from a directorial and a writing perspective because it was hard to do both. And I think I'm a better director and writer than I ever was an actor. However, I think all directors should act and should have been actors at some point. Because that's what you're trading in. Let's see what else here.
We'll type in. We'll talk about what's coming up next and how to keep in touch in just a second. I think the only other outstanding question is Jimmy's about ADR technique if localizing a foreign game, which opens up a whole.
Yeah, that's its own special thing too. That's like they say Ginger Rogers was doing everything Fred Astaire was doing backwards and in heels. That's what doing ADR is to me. It's all the difficulty of acting, and then on top of that, they're like 3 beeps you have from here to here, and watch those lip flaps.
Right.
Jesus, that's almost impossible. It seems almost impossible to me. There's a ton of work in that, right? We're in a global entertainment marketplace, and Netflix and streaming services like that are buying television series from overseas, and then they want to do high quality dubs. It used to just be dubbing was for anime. Now it's for all different kinds of stuff. And so
that's happening in the gaming as well.
It's happening in games. One thing you see in games a lot, in games, matching the lip flaps is a little less important, but you'll often get like, the Japanese file was 1.5 seconds, so you can't be more than 1.5 seconds or less than a second, right? And so you got to fit your performance in English into whatever the window is, because they don't mind programmatically reflapping the lip. They don't want to change the length of the animations. That happens all the time. And the way I do that is we find the emotional truth first, and then we compare what we have against their file, and if it's too long we tighten it up, or if it's too short we expand it with additional choreography. But I think you got to go truth then tech rather than the other way around.
That's a great place to end. Yeah. Well, Kal and Dan, this has been a really great session and really, really good questions, everybody. Really on point and really opening up a lot of different aspects of this work. Kal, how can people best stay in touch with you? And
they can email me or text message me. I'm much busier than I was in the last couple of years, so I'm coaching a little less. But if it's cool with you, I'm going to throw my email address and my phone number in.
In the chat. We'll keep this up for a second, and then
is it cool if I throw in the links from my class stuff as well? I see.
Yeah, absolutely. No, everybody should know about it, and everybody should do it. And the thing that's really cool about how you MA work is that you do it in very small batches, because it's really profound work. So I love that.
Yeah, it's 6 people at a time. So I just threw in the link for the foundational series, which is a slightly shorter class, which happens on Fridays for the next 2 weeks. And then I'm also going to throw in the info for the Sunday intensive. You don't have to have done one to do the other. They are different experiences. You can do either or both. But there's a booking link and stuff there if you want it. So 2 Fridays, 2 Sundays, starting this Friday. And here is my email address. As soon as I learn to type.
And Dan, do you want to tell people and type in how they can reach you and about VOBS, and then I'll talk about.
Sure. It's homevoiceoverstudio.com. And you can reach me, you can contact me there. You can drop off a specimen of your audio in my specimen collection cup, and for $25, and I will give you a an analysis of what your audio sounds like and what it is you need to improve it, unless it's really bad, in which case we need to talk more.
Yeah, and did you say VOBS too, Dan?
And of course, don't forget Voiceover Body Shop. We're on all this. We're on all the time, fresh content every week at VOBS.tv and on Facebook.
Yep, excellent. And then for all things dojo, guys, we are here, and we're here to guide, support, connect, and accelerate you every step of the way from I don't know to working pro. So wherever you are on your journey, we can be a resource for you to get to where you want to go. This sort of connection of bringing people together and bringing you to people like Dan and Cal is part of the game here. In terms of what we have coming up, we're always doing something here. You can reach us at www.thevodojo.com. And if you're just starting out or you're halfway there and you need to want to reset to take it all the way, we have our You Should Do Voiceover Intensive has just started is coming up this weekend, the 8th, 9th, and 10th. We have some spaces for the live weekend intensive. We also just started the 6-week virtual version. So you can jump in. That's Monday nights. What else is going on? I think that's kind of what we're wrapping up the year here. If you want to talk more with me, go to the website, and I'm always happy to talk with you for a voiceover once-over call. Free 15 minutes. We can talk about where you're at and where you'd like to be, et cetera, et cetera. And we do this the first Wednesday of every month. Dan and I are here with different fabulous friends. And so you can put it on your calendar. Oh, and then if you're working pro, we also have our VO Dojo Pro Fight Clubs, which, Cal, we need to get on your calendar for 2020. Because then you get to work with Cal too. It's awesome. So those are coming up. We have a live one that we're waiting for confirmation on next Thursday, the 14th. And then we do one virtually. And Chuck Wedge, who is a toy designer, he works with Leapfrog and casts all the voices for that.
Cool.
Dojo member is coming up, I think the 19th, Tuesday night. So, and if touch base, look up the Fight Club. There's lots of details. But guys, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. We will have a recording of this. Tell people about it. Tell people about Dojo, tell them about VOBS, tell them about Cal's classes, spread the word. And we will see you next month. Thank you guys so much. So
thank you, Tish.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
See you next
Talk to you soon.